right, welcome to the Campfire. I'm your host, Chip May, and I'm excited to be joined with my co-host, Ryan Tinetti.
Hey, Chip, how's it going?
Great. And we're joined again with one of our favorite guests. I say favorite because he'd be one of the first two-time guests here, John Nunes, who's the president of Concordia College in New York.
Hello, Chip. Welcome to my office.
You have a lot of books out there. Impressive work, John. So,
you got to fake it till you make it.
That's right.
Well, speaking of faking it, I'm out on the boardwalk here right now, sunny and 80, because I don't have any books in my office. Anyways, they're mostly DVDs. So, and Ryan, you've got a dead plant behind you. So thank you for that.
I'm trying. I'm doing my best. I water it at least once every couple of weeks.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have John back. We had a conversation this summer about Christian leadership, and it's obviously an important time to be looking at leadership again and what it means to be a Christian leadership during a crisis. And but first, let's check in, John. How are things in New York? I know that's a loaded question, as you are right next to New York City. But tell us how things are going out there.
Yeah, it's been really tough, Chip. Concordia is in the epicenter of the current COVID crisis, and we are literally blocks from the first place that was designated a containment zone, which is New Rochelle, New York, which is adjacent to Bronxville, New York. There have been more deaths in New York State than there have been in any other country in the world, and it's also impacted Lutherans here. So it's been tough.
As you are finding yourself kind of thrust into this place of leadership, not only for your college, but in the area, and so many leaders really find their leadership, the deepest depths of their leadership in a time of crisis. John, who have been some of your own inspirations and mentors for when you think about what it means for you to be a leader? Who are some of those that you've Sorry, Chip.
So one of the people I've turned to significantly is the district president here, Bishop Derek Leacakes. In fact, I had a call with him yesterday, and in that call, we spent a significant amount of time on the phone talking about kind of a pastoral response to the death and to the suffering that we are living through here. When I called him, he initially said, gee, I hope you're not calling to tell me about any more deaths. I've heard too much about death in New York. In fact, there are 99 congregations in the Atlantic District, so it's a relatively small district as far as the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is concerned. And 2 of those congregations have closed in the last month because they just cannot maintain themselves through the COVID crisis. And of those 99 congregations, 31 have experienced at least one death, and many have experienced multiple deaths, so that the total number of those who have died, just LCMS Lutherans in the greater New York area, is over 90. We here on the campus have also suffered deaths. I would say that they are both indirectly related to COVID. So one is a student, a graduate student who graduated in 2018 with her undergraduate degree and was scheduled to walk in May for our commencement, which is of course canceled. And she went to a hospital that was kind of overrun and overwhelmed with cases of COVID and was in a state of chaos. And she attempted to give birth to a baby who was full term. And the baby, praise God, survived. Baby's name is Elias. But she herself, she bled out and died on the table. So indirectly related. And then we had another person in our community who died last week in her home alone, probably despairing from this COVID situation on her birthday at 42 years old. So there have been significant challenges here at the kind of intersection of life and death and hope and despair and all that afflicts humans and all that God has come to address in the lives of humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the life of a college president, as we talked in our last conversation, is a stressful one to begin with. Now you put these other stresses in it. It's a pressure cooker, right? I mean, it's got to be intense. All the pressures, and then just all the unknowns that we have, the uncertainty of what the future is going to be. Bringing not only health wise but also financially, and as it just mentioned, the other kind of side effects of this uh, crisis, all the other things that are falling through the cracks right now. Um, as a leader, where do you go first? I guess what's your first reaction in this? Mine is to flee. Honestly, like I want to get out of here. Like, unfortunately, it's a pandemic. It's a global pandemic, so there's no place to go. I think, but the first instinct is like, man, this is just crazy, right? But as a seasoned leader, where do you kind of go first, or what's your first reaction in this?
You're exactly right, Chip. Of course, the easiest reaction or response would be one of denial, or to try to find the closest rose-colored glasses you could find, to put those on and just dream of a different sort of world, so to be in various kinds of denial. One of the things I fight against is, the flee or the fight or flight syndrome. And I try to go to the problem. So one of the things I like about Rudy Giuliani, for example, at 9/11, was when the towers were crashing down, he went to the towers. He went to the problem. And when you go to the problem here, you discover some things. You discover that people are incredibly anxious. In other words, they have fears that are ambiguous, vague, and unspecified. And that goes, by the way, for college leaders. I talk to a lot of college presidents, and we're all anxious because none of us knows what the future holds. So people are anxious. People are afraid, very fearful. And fear, of course, is different than anxiety. Anxiety is sort of non-specific. Fear is very specific. And we have something very specific to be afraid of in these times, this COVID-19 infection, which has formed an inflection point in our entire lives. Our lives, we know, will not ever be the same. There is this inflection point. So there's fear that has really grabbed us. And it's interesting, in the Bible, both the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament scriptures, 365 times the phrase appears, "Be not afraid." And there's a reason for that. It's because there's so much that we have to be afraid of.
Right.
So when you go to the problem, I think you discover a lot about what people are sort of, how they're living. And there's more there too. I mean, I think gun sales are rising. That's a strange kind of phenomena in these times. So people are armed, they're fully armed with weapons, and they're also armed with half-truths, which are not helpful in times like these. And then I think people are also are driven during times of stress and crisis to playing the blame game and turning and finding someone that they can accuse or some kind of source or root for their problems. So it's about kind of disturbing all of those very normal human reactions with the word of hope that comes uniquely in the gospel of Jesus Christ.
And it sounds like as you try to lead in the midst of crisis, like you say, over and over again, we're told, be not afraid, or many times it could even be translated as stop being afraid, because you already are. But that to lead in this time, it's not going to be leading, either being afraid or leading, but it's going to be finding a way to navigate through the fear and through the anxiety and be able to guide and direct people and say, hey, look, the fear, the anxiety that you have, it's real. We can recognize that, but not allow it to overwhelm us. So how do you try to navigate that, even while you yourself personally you're not immune to this, whether it be the disease or whether it be the fear. And so how do you keep that balance of, on the one hand, I recognize that I myself share many of these fears and anxieties, but on the other hand, I need to lead these people, and I can't just succumb to what I'm trying to lead them out of.
So, as Chip has noted, no matter how tempting it is to flee or the fight-flight reaction, there is a time, I think, when you have to zoom up and zoom out of the situation. But it's to what you zoom out and away from. It's the thing that you go to. In other words, So for me, and it's, it sounds like a pious platitude, but it's real. I mean, reading scripture has been a great solace. We grieve, we suffer, but we do not grieve or suffer as those who have no hope. And that's a true and that's a real promise. It's a tangible promise, tasteable promise for us. And then it's been interesting during these times of quarantine here that, my relationship, my marriage has been an incredible gift to me. So Monique has been incredible as we found ways to work together and walk together that are new. So, I think God gives us ample resources in our lives and gives us gifts, and we just got to get back to the giver of the gifts as much as we can.
What do you think that, as you're working with staff, I think one of the hardest parts of leadership is making decisions, that affect other people's lives, not only the people that you're serving, students, campers, whatever it might be, parishioners, but also the staff, right? And how do you balance this need for helping people understand the reality of the situation, kind of the gravity of it, but also I guess being transparent in maybe the vulnerability that you have in this moment, or going there where I guess where they're at without, I guess, going too far, where you're like, they don't want to know everything that's going on, but they have to know something, right?
Yeah, you say that exactly right, Chip. It is a balance between understanding that vocation on the one hand and location do more than just rhyme. They actually are tied together. So the places to which we're called, and the particular people and the particular places, so it's very incarnational, and we're called with our full selves. So our full human selves are called to a place. God uses human means on purpose. So on the one hand, it's all about all that I can bring to bear. And then on the other hand, it's not about me at all. And so I got that reminder one summer when I was lecturing at a place in Michigan, about 2/3 up the West Coast, called Arcadia.
Great place, I hear.
And after one particular, maybe self-obsessed lecture series, I was given a gift, and it was wrapped nice and neatly wrapped. And the giver of the gift said, "Now, don't open this until you leave camp." And so, 100 yards away from camp, I opened the gift and just shook my head at the gift. I actually have it right here. I've kept it in my office as a constant reminder, since it's a mirror. So in the mirror, you see yourself in the mirror. And then across the mirror are written these words. I don't know if you can see it. You can see my camera there. "It's not about you." So the reminder is, it is on the one hand really all about you, because God has chosen you for a purpose, for a time, and God knows what God is doing by choosing you to be in the place where you find yourself, on the one hand. And on the other hand, the hard decisions you're making that you must make, because the worst thing to do is not make a decision, are really not about you. They're about a mission that began before you got there and will continue long after you leave from there. And so it is a kind of delicate dance of keeping both of those truths at play as you lead.
So when you're talking with your staff and you have to kind of explain the hardships, how do you do that in a way that brings hope to them when you personally, by looking at the stark reality of the situation, might not have a lot of hope? Not that you want to lie to them, but as a leader, you don't want to leave your staff or your followers hopeless. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So I think, leaders are uniquely dealers in hope. Leaders are dealers in hope. So they don't deal despair. They don't deal fear. They're not dope dealers. They're hope dealers. So we got to find ways, of course, to deal with hope. But hope is not without reality. I mean, hope is embedded and threaded through with strong doses of what is real, just like the incarnation. The incarnation is not without flesh. The incarnation is very much with flesh. But hope is also, I think, distinct from optimism. Optimism, Gerhard Ferde once said that optimism is the worst despair because it can be a false hope. So false hope, in other words, leads to the ultimate despair. So real hope is real. It's really aware of the realities in which it finds itself. And colleagues know those realities. Colleagues are fully aware of those. So they know when you're sugarcoating, or they know when you're not telling the truth, when you're spinning, they know when you're not telling the truth. And so it's incumbent on dealing hope. And so hope is also not made for times that are when the road is smooth and the times are good, and when the market is up and the wind is at your back. Hope is made for precisely times like these, precisely for the kind of crisis we find ourselves in. That's the purpose of God's hope.
Well, and when you think of our Lord's ministry and his leadership of the disciples, he's boundlessly hopeful and he is brutally honest, constantly. And especially, I think of the upper room discourse in John's gospel, where you have Jesus telling them over and again, hey, look, if they persecuted me, it's going to be a lot worse for you guys. And they're going to hate you. They're going to throw you out. I mean, it's not exactly a pep talk by any stretch of the imagination. But by the same token, it's extremely hopeful because, well, as Jesus says in John 16, take heart, I've overcome the world. So that in the midst of all of this hopelessness and all of these things that are just going to cause them to wring their hands and think, what could we possibly do? Jesus looks it full in the face. And because he does that and then says, but we're going to have ultimate victory, that's where the confidence comes from, I think. Problem is, we're not Jesus, and we're not always as leaders able to get this.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of Bonhoeffer's quote, about, as followers of Christ, we're asking others to come and die, which is not a mega church billboard.
What's the brochure for the summer staff this year?
Right, exactly. Come to Camp Arcadia and suffer immensely. No, and so this idea of connecting the Christian life and Christian leadership with suffering is one that is making a lot more sense right now.
Right.
Yeah. So as Lutherans, we have the gift of the theology of the cross, of course. One of my favorite quotes from Luther, and in fact, there was a church in Philadelphia that had it over the front of the front of the church, over the apse in the church. There's an archway where it had these words, and it was in Latin, Ave Crux Spes Unica, which is in English, Hail Cross, our only hope, which is kind of paradoxical or contradistinct to the way the culture is, that hope is found in the cross. Well, why is hope found in the cross? Hope is found in the cross because we have already died, Colossians tells us, and our lives are hidden with God in Christ. In other words, in baptism, we've already died the ultimate death, which leaves us free to risk every other death for the sake of the life of the world. And that's kind of our confidence and our hope. So in other words, you're already sort of a dead man, and you've died in the water of baptism, which gives you an incredible freedom, a freedom to hope, a freedom to live, a freedom to love, and a freedom to lead through whatever crisis you're in the middle of.
John, one thing that I know I've been wrestling with is as I think we all have, like, this sort of whiplash that we're experiencing of this. I mean, people refer to it as a pivot, and that sounds kind of neat and nice and like you intended to do it. But this kind of whiplash of, and I was thinking, like, all the goals that I had for camp for this year and a strategic plan all worked out, like within like a week, all were gone. And all of a sudden the measure of success is make sure we are still here when this pandemic is over. And then I thought about all the different sort of maybe idols that I have in my life that I had been propping up, like the success of camp, the success of me. And those are all good things, right? You want camp to be successful because God's reaching people through this ministry. But I wonder if this is a time, and it's through suffering, suffering of loss of future, loss of dreams, but of peeling away that as a leader, if I can peel some of that away through the Holy Spirit, understanding that maybe I can embrace my ministry and my leadership in a way that isn't so tied to my self-worth. You know, that if I can lead in a way that isn't about me so much or about success in those ways, but more about being faithful to Jesus Christ and his mission, I might be able to actually be a better leader.
So, you know, there are no unsupervised processes. There is no pain that God does not see. And there is no time when God is not up to something in the world, including in this pandemic. I've got a friend who calls this not only a pandemic, actually Pastor Dean Taylor of a church near the campus, he calls it a plandemic. So all your plans are, you know, for naught. And that's kind of interesting because, you know, as humans, we have probably had an overconfidence in, you know, kind of planning and being sure and certain of what the strategic plan calls for and what the markers are along the way. And, you know, and this has driven us to a new kind of, you know, it's actually come down to believing in God. It's actually coming down, actually, you know, we actually have to pray and trust and hope, you know, look at the words we're using, you know, to talk about business, to talk about leadership. And we're not the only ones. I mean, it's in every sector. It's in every industry. No one knows what the future holds. So in a certain sense, you know, there might be a kind of divine mischief that God is up to in the midst of all of this.
So
to your point.
That's a lovely phrase, and I think that you're spot on. We have done some pretty heavy deconstruction here of this moment. I want to kind of pivot a little bit, as Chip would say, and do some reconstruction here, kind of thinking of what it means for us to be creating or to be thinking creatively now out of this moment. So I want to turn now, looking more to the future. We've talked about the past and the present. You quoted in our last conversation from John Maxwell. It was a great quote. I want to remind our listeners of it. John Maxwell said that the pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change. The leader adjusts the sails. So how are you personally adjusting the sails in this moment? And how can we as leaders generally do so?
That's a great question, Ryan, which is a great way to begin an answer when you're trying to think of a good answer.
Adjusting the sails there on the shoreline.
I'll kind of, yeah.
The wind's blowing through my hair.
The wind blows through his
can't tell.
hair, yeah. So I'll start at a high level and then kind of try to be concrete, because I think that's part of what you're asking for. So at the high level, anxiety is a really interesting experience to have, because anxiety on the one hand can turn you inward and shut you down and paralyze you, so you can't do anything. But if you kind of harness the anxiety, is the way I like to think about it. You know, I've got butterflies, but I try to teach them how to fly in a row. So if you can kind of harness the anxiety, it can be a source of great creative energy, because out of the anxiety, you can say, obviously, the way we have done things will no longer work. It was incredible how we as a campus community turned on a dime. If you would have asked me 3 months ago whether it was possible to have all of our faculty teaching digitally, for example, I would have said, utterly impossible. It can't happen. You know, we have people who resist. We have too many technological glitches. It can't be done. But, you know, the anxious moment, the critical moment, the crisis moment led us to now move 100% of our operations now seamlessly, by God's grace, to online and digital operations. So I think what this moment is creating is a great, and I'm thinking out loud about this, incalculable, you know, unprecedented is a word that's been used over and over again, opportunity for leaders who are kind of creative and thoughtful and attentive to take the word I've heard a couple times, to pivot. So it is the infection point is an inflection point, an inflection point for us to turn and find new ways of delivering the product. And actually, one of the benefits of being a small school, which is what we are, is we have some real opportunities to be more nimble than a lot of larger operations. We're actually seeing this as potentially an opportunity. I think that applies to churches as well. Churches, there are ways in which this is an incredible opportunity for some churches to reach more and more people. I've talked to a few pastors, for example, who have described how their attendance, however you measure attendance anymore, has actually risen, and they've had a chance to connect with more people. Is that what you're sort of asking, Ryan?
Well, yeah. I mean, as you hit on it, the threats are clear. We've talked about those, but as you say, there's opportunities that go with it as well. And so maybe part of that adjusting the sails is being attuned to the way that the Spirit is blowing in this moment, and not to bemoan the fact that He's blowing in this or that way, but just to adjust the sails and say, okay, it is what it is right now, and let's discern what some of those unique opportunities are right now that wouldn't have been there otherwise. You mentioned that quick turn to the digital on the campus and other opportunities like that.
I've had more people pray with me and for me over the phone than I think I've ever had in the last month. I've had grown men tell me they love me. That's allowed in times of crisis, I guess.
Right.
And so I think, relationally, I think it's, the yearning that sometimes it's in the absence of presence that we most profoundly discern what matters or what our priorities are. In other words, the absence can be as much of a refiner as can presence. And so think about the kind of Eucharistic hunger we have during this time, because we don't have as much access to the Lord's Supper, for example. And that hunger or that fasting can actually induce or produce a marvelous awareness of the value of what really matters in your life, who really matters in your life, or what really matters in life, period.
Yeah, that's a great point, because fasting more generally, when you practice it, when you do return to the first meal, suddenly your taste buds are more acute. It's like it gives that kind of cleansing. Well, I guess that's a different thing in our culture now, but it helps to restore your sensitivity, so that now maybe through this kind of fast, whether it be in terms of the Eucharistic fast or whether it be in terms of fasting from the gathering together, how much sweeter that will be when we're able to do so. And Lord willing, not to be taken for granted as much, although we being human beings, undoubtedly it'll happen again. But it is an opportunity in that sense for us to refresh our taste buds for the exquisite gifts that God gives to us that we were taking for granted, even though they were right in front of us.
I was once in Oregon at Mount Hood, and Monique and I had an extra day, so we drove up to the 7,000-foot level. And at that level, there's a place called the Timberline Lodge. And we were there, and we saw some mountain climbers in the evening at about 8 o'clock in the evening, just as the sun was going down. It was in June, beginning to make their ascent up Mount Hood to I think it goes to 11,000 feet. And so we asked them, we said, why are you guys climbing like when nighttime is coming? And they said, because there's no greater sunrise than that which comes after climbing up the rough side of the mountain all night long. And I think there's a certain truth to our kind of crisis or our experience now is, Easter's coming, Sunday's coming, and through this kind of dark night, there is a sort of value on the horizon. And that's what it means that leaders are hope dealers, isn't it? That we actually point to the light, or we point to the sunrise, or we point to Easter, or we point to resurrection in the midst of suffering.
John, one last question for you on this is, uh, leaders are always in the future, right? We're always looking out into the future, and we're planning ahead. A good friend of ours, Mike Newman, said to me once, like, 'cause I was sort of complaining about some leadership issue, and he goes, leaders are always ahead of everyone else because you have to be planning ahead. And one of the interesting things I've noticed now is, of course, we're all in the future now because we're all trying to anticipate, and we're all trying to be in the future, but none of us have any idea what it's going to be, and it can be almost a paralyzing thing. So what are your thoughts about this idea of a leader and their interaction with the present as well as the future?
Yeah, Chip. So there's this great word that describes a kind of disfigured figure in the scriptures often, who never fits in, and he or she in some cases show up in many different places, and they're called prophets or prophetesses, and they kind of see things that others don't see, or they see things into reality. And I think the prophetic role of the leader is exactly that. They see possibility when others see only invisibility or impossibility. But in the very act of seeing, in the very seeing that they, so as seers, in the very act of seeing, they bring, I hate to use the phrase, it's almost like, a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's a God-fulfilling prophecy. They bring that which is the future reality into existence. That which does not exist at all, it kind of creatively comes into existence because the prophet sees it before it's even there. So it's a kind of anticipatory, this is what it means to lead with hope, right? To lead with hope is you kind of are leaning, kind of on tiptoe, leaning into the future that is not even arrived yet. And you're kind of leaning up and you're seeing over the fence to that which is yet to come. And you're assuring those around you that it's that not we're going to get through this,
Yeah.
but that on the other side, there's a God who has already been through this and is leading us through ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And maybe to tie that together and use a little bit different image, it's like the leader is a prophet, leader is also a midwife. And we're in the midst of some real birth pangs right now. And so just reminding people, hey, just keep breathing. Sorry, I've witnessed several births, so I can picture in my mind, but this is painful. But I mean, this is an image that Jesus himself uses, right? We're in the midst of those birth pangs, but can we be people who help to bring forth that better future for God's people? John, this has been a great conversation as always. Last thing we always ask folks are, what are some of the resources, voices that you're listening to right now, things that you're reading or podcasts that you're listening to, things that might be beneficial for our listeners?
Yeah, and again, I apologize for going to, and you shouldn't have to apologize for this, for going to the sources that kind of make us who we are. These are the sources that make us who we are, after all. But in the book of Hebrews, I've been spending a lot of time in the 10th chapter. And it was a dear friend, Bob Scuderi, who directed me to these words. And these words I have them highlighted, and the ribbon in my Bible is in them, from Hebrews chapter 10, verse 36. I've been reading a lot of this. For you need endurance. I wake up every morning and remind myself that. For you need endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, which is what I strive every day to do, you may receive what was promised. There's the hope of what is promised. And I skip down to verse 39. I love this. But we are not among those who shrink back and so are lost, but among those who have faith and so are saved. Simple and true. We are not among those who shrink back. So in the midst of crisis, probably the best thing we can do is sort of to be unshrinkable in the midst of the crisis. I've been spending a lot of time right there in just those few words, those few verses. It's all I really have time for these days. It's just these morsels.
Awesome. Ryan, what are you reading?
I'm revisiting a book by a wonderful author, Australian theologian. I think he's been a guest at camp before, John Kleinig. happen to have it with me here. His book, Grace Upon Grace, and Spirituality for Today is the subtitle. And it's just such a, Dr. Kleinig is just such a rich source of wisdom, and I'm so grateful to return to his works and just drink that in.
Wow. You guys have such pious
I know you,
answers.
Chip. Chip, what do you
I
read?
know. It's like I got to come up with something good here. I'm reading the Hebrew scriptures in the original language. No, I am reading Ferdy's on being a theologian of the cross. His look at the Heidelberg dissertation, which I amazingly had not read, and it's very helpful. I also am reading David Brooks' book, Second Mountain, which he deals a lot with leadership in that book, and kind of these eternal virtues, which David Brooks is so good at understanding. And so that has been really, really helpful during these times as well. And I do read the Bible too, guys. Okay, so
Hey, Chip, I know you are the interviewer, Chip. You and Ryan, extraordinary interviewers. But can I ask you, what's up at camp?
well, this will probably go out in a few weeks, so who knows what it'll be like when it goes out there. But we are constantly analyzing or trying to figure out what lays ahead here. It's been really interesting to be in touch with all the different Christian camp organizations, Lutheran, non-Lutherans, as well as even the resort industry. What are they doing? Trying to learn from others. No one knows anything. I can tell you that right now. No one knows anything. Marriott and the camp down the street had the same information of checking the CDC website, so, but, I think what we're doing now is kind of trying to plan for this upcoming season. What can we do? What can't we do? But also taking a step back and saying, what does it mean to be faithful to camp's mission if we can't bring people to camp safely? And that is a huge challenge, but it's sort of broadening. What does our mission mean now? And what does it mean to take care of each other within the camp community and others? And that is invigorating. I've been it's been engaging to talk with others about that. It's also been wonderful to have the support of the Arcadia family. I mean, we have such a passionate group of people that love this place, and to see them come together is, when I'm in my office all by myself every day right now, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and feeling like you're in this by yourself. And so I've got Jesus, and I've got the people Jesus put in my life to help me through it. And that has been, John, as you said, more people have prayed with you and everything, but I feel like I've got so many people out there praying for me right now that, and I do feel encouraged by that. And of course, having Pastor Tinetti as my pastor and my friend has been extremely important at this time as well. And thank you, Ryan, for that $1 million gift to Camp Arcadia as well. I will wait to cash it, but thank you.
That's right.
Bounce.
Well, John, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time, and God bless you and all the people there in New York. Take care.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right, peace.